of the conference. It's a pleasure to introduce Imogen Dickie. Imogen is a professor of philosophy at the University of Toronto. She's famous for her work in philosophy of mind, in philosophy of language, and many other things. Her work on reference, on singular thought, and of course rejection. And today she's going to talk about negation and denial and inferential expressivist framework.
Thank you, Luca. It's so nice to be here. So I'm going to talk about inferentialism, negation, denial, connections with work of Luca's and Julian's will emerge. Okay, so let's start, and I'll skip over some background at various places because Luca and Julian provided it already. Let's just get ourselves in the mood. What is inferentialism about the logical constants? Okay, what does it really mean? Right, so think about the standard classical story that you might tell. If somebody asks you, where the introduction and elimination rules for logical constants come from. So top of the page, on page 1 of the handout, we've got truth table and some introduction and elimination rules. If you just look at the introduction rule for and, yeah, you say, well, why is that the right rule? Well, the standard thing to do is to look to the truth table and say, look, if I've got A and I've got B, then I'm on row 1 of the truth table, and on row 1 I've also got A and B. So that's my justification for the introduction rule. And similarly for the elimination rules, look to the truth table and say, well, look, good introduction and elimination rules are rules that preserve truth. So given the truth table and the criterion, a good rule preserves truth, I can justify the introduction and elimination rules for the classical constants. Right? Now, if you are an inferentialist, you have to think there's something wrong with that story. Okay? Otherwise, there's no point in this game that we're playing, which really is the game, saying, no, that's getting things the wrong way around. If I'm going to be a classical logician, and I'm an inferentialist, then what I am about is treating the introduction and elimination rules as prior. So I'm going to say goodness of rules is prior. And then if I want to have the truth tables for any purpose, I treat those as derived from the introduction and elimination rules. Okay, so why be an inferentialist? Now, one answer might be, okay, I'm an inferentialist about everything. I think that for all expressions, use is prior to representation. And so my inferentialism about logical constants is just a special case. Now, something else that you might do, you might think, okay, there's something about logic in particular, which makes it especially fit for an inferentialist program. You might think, look, there's global inferentialism, and also there's something special about logic. And so you're running both of these motivations at once, in effect. So what's the motivation kind of inside questions just about logic? The various answers that you might get here's my favorite answer. So suppose that we agree with the classical logician who pointed to the truth tables to explain why the introduction and elimination rules are good rules. Suppose we agree with that person and we say, look, that's all there is to say about the correctness and incorrectness of deployments of a constant. Well, look, in that case, we're going to have no reason to think that this move here on the handout, A and B, therefore A, is any better than this other one, which is nasty to read out, yeah? But it's fine, that move is fine if all that's required is that a good move preserve truth. And another way to put that, A and B has the same truth table as it's not the case that not A or not B. So we've got no account, if we just stay with the standard classical story, of why the move A and B, therefore A, looks so much better to us in a proof. So this is actually reaching back to Frege. So Frege says, meaning it as a bad thing. In proofs as we know them, steps are like jumps. What Frege was looking for all of his life was a gap-free account of first logical proof and then mathematical proof. Okay? So I think that the motivation for inferentialism just from inside logic is coming from this business about wanting to have a gap-free proof. Now, what exactly that comes to, well, that is part of the problem, to try to explain what a gap-free proof actually is. Okay, so there's why I think you should be an inferentialist about logic. Okay, now I'm going to say two things to motivate the claim that if you're an inferentialist, you should be a bilateralist. Okay, so one of those things has been talked about a little bit by our friends this morning, and that is the trouble with classical negation in an inferentialist framework. So there are the classical introduction and elimination rules for negation. And now let's be inferentialists. So take the classical rules and now take the inferentialist supposition that the introduction and elimination rules together give the meaning of, what I mean by that is, tell us what understanding the constant involved. Give the meaning of the constant. Let's suppose the introduction and the elimination rules do that. So if we grant that classical negation introduction and classical negation elimination together specify the meaning of classical not, then we get this line of thought. So what you mean by not A is explained as something like, well, reachable by reducing A to absurdity. And what you mean by not A is explained as something like reachable by reducing to absurdity the possibility of reducing A to absurdity, but though the absurdity of A should entail the non-absurdity, and that is the consistency of A, we've got no reason to think that it entails A itself. So the absurdity of A, what should I conclude? Oh, A is consistent. But what are we doing when we apply classical negation elimination? We are moving from the absurdity of A to A itself. You might think, okay, look, where is that move coming from? One issue. And then the second issue, you might think, look, why are we explaining the conditions for moving to not A in terms of absurdity in the first place? Shouldn't A's falsity, shouldn't falsity be enough? Why is absurdity even getting into the picture? Now, if we could point back to the truth table here, if we could point to the truth table, then we'd make both of these worries go away. We just say, well, look at this truth table. Okay, if A is absurd, then it's certainly not true, absurdity being stronger than non-truth. If A is absurd, it's certainly not true. So if A is absurd, I can reduce A to absurdity, I'm on this row, in which case not A is true. Yeah? So I can explain. I can make everything be all right by pointing to the truth table, but now I've pointed to the truth table to explain the introduction and elimination rules. So I take it that the problem for that classical negation poses for a traditional inferentialist, so that is somebody who thinks that you do everything just in terms of assertion. The problem that the truth table poses, that classical negation poses, is that you're not really getting an account of why these rules are good rules, because you're still going to have to point to the truth table, which is just giving up the game. Okay, so this is where the bilateralist enters. The bilateralist says, look, I am going to give an account of the logical constants which recognizes the fact that we don't just use assertions in proofs. So a proof doesn't just go assert this, assert that, assert the next thing, yeah? And also involves sentences denied occurring as both premises and conclusions. And if we say that, then our introduction and elimination rules are going to be stated not just in terms of what justifies you in asserting a sentence containing a constant and what you're justified in moving to given such an assertion, but we're also going to have rules which lay down when you can deny a sentence and what you can move to from the sentence denied, the sentence contains the logical constant in question. So the bilateralist rules for negation, Luca already showed us. There they are again at the top of page 2 of the handout. And these rules enable classical negation introduction and classical negation elimination to be derived. So I won't go through that because of the setup that we've had this morning. So in a bilateral framework, we get to keep classical negation without treating the meaning of classical not as explained in terms of absurdity. We still get to do all of the inferring that we might like involving absurdity. Namely, we get to prove things by reductio, because what is the point of being a classical logician if you can't do that? We get to prove things by reductio, but we're not explaining the meaning of not in terms of absurdity. So it looks like a beautiful triumph for about 3 seconds. Okay, so there is one reason for being a bilateralist if you're going to be an inferentialist. There is a second reason, and this is connected with the other way of motivating inferentialism, which is not special to logic. Rather, it's, okay, I believe in a use-first account. Goodness of use explained prior to questions about representational content. I believe in that kind of account across the board. Now, if that's your picture, and you are a unilateralist, namely you think that the relevant features of use, which are going into explaining representational content, truth conditions, are features to do with patterns of assertion, then you get a bad thing. Here's the bad thing that you get. So it's the little argument on the handout. Okay, so let's suppose, this is number 4 on the handout. So suppose, first thing, truth conditions are determined by relevant aspects of patterns of use. So that's umbrella inferentialism being supposed. Number 2, truth conditions are determined by patterns of assertability. That is unilateralism. Okay, number 3, look, the patterns of assertability for it is assertable that P and P are the same. Put those things together and we get P and it is assertable that P have the same truth conditions. So number 5, P is true if and only if it is assertable. We've got collapse of truth conditions into assertability conditions. And now we're going to have to wiggle and squirm in order to avoid being stuck with a verificationist disaster. Okay. All right. So why accept? So how are we going to respond to this? You might say, okay, I'm a verificationist, and in my heart, I always have been one, and try to so try to be comfortable with that. Another thing that you might do is fiddle around with number 3. So patterns of assertability for it is assertable that P and P are the same. Okay, so we can talk about this later, but here's a first motivation for this. Why should we accept 3? Well, consider these 2 things, and let's just take the common view that saying yes to a polar question is equivalent to assertion. Okay, so consider A. So suppose that here I am speaking, I say P, but do I say yes to P? The only coherent answer is yes. Similarly, suppose I say, do I say yes to P? Yes. P? Again, any answer other than yes is incoherent. So I'm taking it and I'm building nothing about what assertion is or in here. I'm just taking it that the pattern of assertability for P is the same as the pattern of assertability for P is assertable. Okay, and so that is number 3 in the argument. Okay, now bilateralism. So here's a second reason to be a bilateralist if you are an inferentialist. The first is because of the good things that you think you might be able to get about negation. Here's a second reason. Bilateralism gives us a response to this challenge for an inferentialist, for overall umbrella inferentialist, the challenge of truth conditions collapsing into assertability conditions. Because consider this, do I say yes to P? Well, no. P? Well, I'm actually not committed to saying no to P by the fact that I've said no to, do I say yes to P? So I take it that gives some grounds for saying that the denial conditions for P is assertable are distinct from the denial conditions for P. So if we now go back to the collapse argument and we've replaced number 2, which was truth conditions are determined by patterns of assertability, unilateralist assumption, if we replace that with the bilateralist version, truth conditions are determined by patterns of assertability and deniability, then the collapse challenge collapses as long as conditions of denial are not themselves determined by conditions for assertion. So if you move to bilateralism and you've got an account of the independence of denial and assertion where conditions for denial are not themselves determined by conditions for assertion, you've got a way out of this collapse challenge. Okay, so there are 2 reasons to be a bilateralist if you are going to be an inferentialist. Now, what I want to do now is raise a problem. The problem kind of starts bubbling up in the mind when you think about what denial or rejection, actually look like in language. Challenge bubbles up quite quickly when you start to think about that. And I'm going to give you what I now think is the canonical version of this challenge. Okay, so the challenge is it's raised by cases like this. So, and these are what Luca was calling weak rejections. Okay, so did Homer write the Republic? Follow question. I said no, denying or rejecting it. Why am I denying, rejecting? Well, I might go on and say there was no Homer. No, sorry. Did Homer write the Republic? No, that was Plato. I might say, but I might also say, did Homer write the Republic? No, there was no Homer. I don't know who did it, but it wasn't Homer. Right? So no, there was no Homer. Right? That's weak rejection. Okay. Is Middlemarch banned? So here I'm thinking about a beautiful paper of Jamie Tappenden's, where he's talking about how something like banned. The way that the predicates, suppose there's a committee set up, censorship committee. When I first started using this example, this seemed less sinister than it now seems, because that's before the end of the world. Look, in history, there used to be censorship committees, because it was the censorship committee, and the committee has banned various things, but it hasn't yet got to, Victorian novels. So you say to me, is Middlemarch banned? And I say, no, the committee hasn't decided yet how to apply, banned to treatises that don't mention abortion. Okay, so that again is weak rejection. And then here are Luca and Julian's cases of denial from ignorance. And I actually think that here, so look, X did it. So it's not a question, but I actually think you get better intuitive results if you put it like this. I say to you, look, so X did it. You say, no, it might have been anyone, right? So that is our denial, rejection from ignorance. So we take these cases, And then we go back, if we then go back to the bilateralist rules for classical negation, yeah, and we say, okay, what I mean by that horizontal line, the denial line, is denial, and oh, by the way, these are denials. If you do that, you're going to get 10 kinds of disaster, okay? So this kind of denial or rejection, it's there all over the place. Rejection, denial in natural language is weak, Luca and Julian say. So, you know, you can't just help yourself to a notion of denial, which is going to get you your bilateralist goodies. Because this is sort of from a distance challenge. Now I'm going to give you what I take to be the real challenge that we have to deal with here. So this is number 6 on the handout. Okay. So here's what I'm calling the sonorously the bilateralist dilemma. Okay. Okay. So first premise: either assertion and denial are opposed as contrary activities. That's to say, it can't be right both to assert and to deny the same token sentence in the same context, but it may be right to do neither. Or they are opposed as contradictory activities. Given a token sentence in a context, either assertion is correct or denial is, and not both. And just plugging that into some of the terminology we've got in place from the talks this morning, strong assertion and strong denial, they are contrary activities, and strong assertion and weak denial are contradictory activities. That's just either P or no, I don't accept P for whatever reason, block P for whatever reason. Okay, so but my first premise here: either assertion and denial are opposed as contrary, or they're opposed as contradictory. If they are opposed as contrary activities, asserting and denying, then the bilateralist defense of classical negation fails because we can't get classical negation introduction. So Luca already showed us this morning. The reason we can't get classical negation introduction is that if I say assertion and denial are opposed as contraries, which is to say, given a sentence in a context, might be right to assert, might be right to deny, can't be right to do both, but there's a third option, which is neither. If that's my situation, and then I say, oh look, if you assert A, you get a contradiction, I can't conclude, okay, therefore you can deny A, therefore not A. Okay, so if assertion and denial are opposed as contrary activities, the bilateralist defense of classical negation fails. If they are opposed as contradictory activities, then it falters. Well, why? Because denial and assertion are not independent in the way that the bilateralist response to the collapse challenge requires. So note, I've said falters there because here you can wiggle around. You can say, I want the thing about negation, but the collapse challenge is not worrying me. Yeah? But suppose that you do want umbrella inferentialism, yeah? Then the suggestion is you need your account of denial conditions to be independent from assertion conditions in that they are not determined by assertion conditions, because otherwise you're going to get the collapse of truth conditions into assertability conditions in an inferentialist, even a bilateralist framework. Okay, so first move, asserting and denying are either contradictory activities or they are contrary activities. If they're contrary activities, we can't have the defense of classical negation. If they are contradictory activities, we've got this problem about the independence of assertion and denial. Yeah, we haven't escaped the collapse of truth conditions into assertability conditions. So bad news for the bilateralist. Okay, so here is what I'm going to suggest as a solution. And I'm sorry that this is not well put on the handout. So everybody look at me instead of at the handout. Okay. Here's the solution that I want to propose. There is this thing that we do, which Luca and Julian are calling strong assertion, strong denial. There is this single thing that we do, and the activity, well, it's two things that we do, strongly asserting, strongly denying. Yeah. These activities are opposed as contraries, but in the context of deductive inference, the third option, that neither is right, gets screened off. So in the context of deductive inference, strong assertion and strong denial, which in the wild are contradictory activities, become contrary activities, and we get the defense of classical negation. Okay? So there is what I am. There's what I'm going to propose, and the big challenge. Make that move non-ad hoc. Okay, so you can see how this would solve the problem, I hope. If we could argue that strong assertion and strong denial, just kind of on their own in general, are contradictory activities, yeah, leaving the option of weak denial, just floating about. If we can say strong assertion, strong denial are contradictory activities, but in the context of deductive inference, the third option, that neither strong assertion nor strong denial is correct, is screened off. So we get to say that they're contradictory, then that'll solve the problem. But you can't just stipulate that. Okay, so what might motivate this move? So we're at 7.1 on the handout now. So here's a step towards motivating the solution. So first observation. The subject matter relations that connect ordinary thought to ordinary things and properties are subject to non-specificity and instability, and maybe it'd be better to put these kind of well, they're subject to all kinds of loosey-goosiness, let's say. So this is most familiar as a point about adjectives. Most natural language adjectives are gradable, and we're sliding around the thresholds for a gradable adjective all the time. And just ordinary use of a gradable adjective in a sentence, if I say Giorgio's tall, I do commit myself to saying anybody taller than Giorgio is tall, but I don't commit myself to saying here's a hard and fast line. There's the tallness threshold. So, ordinary use of gradable adjective is not sitting on some subject matter determining relation, which is imposing a sharp threshold. That's a familiar point. But you're also getting something, not the same thing, but you're getting something related for singular terms in what people call non-specificity cases. I point to a car and I say that's a status symbol. Point to a car and I say that's a status symbol. Do I mean that particular Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost? Or do I mean the Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost as a car type? Yeah. And the conversation can just move on perfectly fine without me having jumped one way or another. So ordinary subject, so that's just two cases, but this is the kind of thing that's driving observation number one, that the subject matter determining relations that connect ordinary thought to ordinary things and properties are subject to non-specificity and instability. Here's a second observation. Look, in theorizing about actual deductive reasoning, so suppose you want to say some of what we do when we kind of prove things to each other, do the little kinds of proofs you do as you go around in life, right? So some of the things that do that actually is genuine deductive reasoning. Okay, so in theorizing about our actual genuine deductive reasoning, it wouldn't do to pretend that there are stipulations when in fact there are none. So think about teaching baby predicate calculus. And so you say, look, here are the constants, A, B, C. A refers to A, stipulation. Yeah? And or F refers to this function which takes objects to the true if and only if they're F. So you have stipulations lying at the bottom, giving you a little toy model theorem. But if we're going to be theorizing about actual logic in actual use, we can't just say, oh, by the way, there are stipulations there, because there aren't. But rather, we need to treat the relations that in fact do determine the subject matter of our thinking as standing in where the stipulations go in a formal system. So now here's a question. How can basic subject matter determining relations that lack stability and precision act as stable and precise, like stipulative relations that lie at the bottom of engagement in deductive reasoning? And here's what I take it the answer has to be: the non-specific and shifting relations that hook us up to the subject matter of ordinary thought take on the required properties of precision and stability when the wider environment is restricted in the way characteristic of deductive argument. So, but what's the restriction? What's the restriction characteristic of deductive argument? Well, whatever else we say there, we have to say that the restriction secures specificity and stability of subject matter. Okay? Now, here's what I am about to propose. The subject matter determining relations that underpin ordinary thought and speech about ordinary objects and their properties, those subject matter relations have got all this lack of a specific target built into them. So subject matter determining relations, which are, I'm going to say, relations secured by contrary activity of assertion and denial. When we make the move that you have to make anyway to get to the context of deductive inference, if you're theorizing, is to say, okay, there's some kind of move being made which is firming up subject matter, treating subject matter as determinate. That move does the work of screening off the third option in our assertion denial contrary activity. And so we get strong assertion, strong denial, just off sentences on their own. But they are things that occur at a level where subject matter is up for grabs. And they are contrary activities. In the context of deductive inference, the third option is left behind, and we get contradictories, and so we can defend classical negation as we want to. And then we want to have all of the pretty things that Luca and Julian have got. We say, okay, I've got truth conditions explained in terms of the base move that puts me in a position to engage in ordinary inference. And now I've got a notion of content, and I'm going to say weak assertion is blocking the possibility of ruling out that content. Weak rejection is blocking the possibility of ruling out its negation. And whatever you want about probability, here I get above my pay grade probability, but you're going to be able to have that too. Okay, so there are respects in which I'm allied with what Luca and Julian have, but there's something very different, which is that rather than doing what came out in the discussion, I've abandoned my handout, rather than doing what it came out in the discussion Luca and Julian are doing, which is take it that content is determined in this global way by use. I'm getting content is determined by base subject matter determining relations, which is this strong assertion, strong rejection. And then when we get into an inferential context, the third option is screened off. Okay, so let me just give you a little bit of realization of that skeleton plan. And so this is where my thinking about philosophy of logic is sitting on top of my view about reference. And actually, I think it's kind of striking. If you read people when they're talking, in this literature, when they're talking about, okay, what's a good rule of inference? Or just actually in philosophy of logic, when they're doing the predicate calculus, because there's good rules of inference, we're not being fancy, we're just, P's and Q's of proposition calculus. Well, you think about, get a bit fancier and start talking about the quantifiers, yeah? Everybody writes as if you don't have to think about the theory of reference at all, right? Just take it that, at the bottom of everything, there's going to be model theory where you stipulate A refers to A, okay? This is wrong, right? I think. It turns out that what you say about the determination of subject matter at the bottom is going to be determining various things. Okay, so here's the view of reference that I've got, which I've defended at length in other places. The view is something like this. So here you are, a subject of thought. I don't have realized it. There you are, a subject of thought. You're receiving signal, and you crunch the signal into bodies of beliefs that you then treat as about a singular thing. What that comes to, treating the bodies of beliefs as about a singular thing, is going to come out in the ways that you use the term, that you, the ordinary singular term that you, with which you express those beliefs. People talk about mental files here. I think the mental files metaphor gets, there's too much of a tendency to hide behind the metaphor. But if you like that metaphor, then by body of beliefs that you treat as about a singular thing there, I think the thing mental files are fine. Okay. So here you are, subject of thought. You're getting incoming signal from perception and from testimony, and you respond by crunching the signal and forming beliefs, which you then use this or that or ordinary proper name or something to express. And in this framework, if we ask, why do you crunch the signal the way you do, then the answer is something like the answer that you'd give if you were asking, if you're looking at a radio telescope, say, look, here it is, there's all this, there's just this signal reaching it, and then there's an algorithm that's running in order to generate a report. Why does the radio telescope run the algorithm that it does? Well, somebody's programmed it, but why do I program it in that way? Well, because they're trying to crunch the signal in a way that generates a focus relation on an object out in the world. And so I think that we're basically working like that. Get all the signal coming in. Yeah? The signal itself doesn't have representational content in any interesting sense that it's caused. Here's the signal coming in. We crunch the signal because what we are trying to do is generate bodies of beliefs in such a way that we are focused on things in the world outside the mind, where what that comes to can then be cashed out in something like this way. What we're trying to do is track objects that are really there and the properties that they really have. Okay, so that's what we're doing in our basic, forming the beliefs that we express using ordinary, A as F atomic sentences. Then here's another way to describe the activity. I've got my little A token, and I've got the signal coming in. And here's how I can respond to the signal. I can put A in this pile with these things, or in this other pile, or I can say, oh, the signal doesn't sustain a verdict. Okay, so it's a contrary activity. 3 outcomes. Can't be right that A goes in both piles. Yeah, it might be right that it goes in neither. So the base activity. So then we say, okay, this pile, these are the Fs. But I could also have kind of given pride of place to this pile. I could have given that the predicate and said, okay, so this pile is the un-Fs. Yeah? But as it is, this pile is the Fs. These are the not Fs, but there might be no verdict. Assertion, strong assertion, strong denial, no verdict. So we've got contrary activity as what underpins basic behavior with atomic sentences. And engagement in this basic activity, it doesn't require commitment to a specific level of fine-grainedness for ordering along dimensions. It doesn't require commitment to a specific threshold. It doesn't require a decision as to which predicates are up for evaluation in the first place, which for me is going to be important for the determination of reference for singular terms. But it doesn't require any of these sorts of specificity or stability, which which then we are going to want to appeal to when we engage in deductive inference. So what we've got just at the base level doesn't suffice to determine specific reference relations or a domain of quantification or a range of functions object to truth value. So just an intuitive term of the point is that you're crunching this information, you're trying to achieve focused relations, but you're quite happy to be zooming in and zooming out in various ways. So how can the base activity, as described just now, generate the precise and stable subject matter relations which are required for deductive inference? And here's the answer. In the setting of deductive inference, we freeze the degree of resolution. We take subject matter as fixed for the envelope within which we are doing the deduction. So we freeze the degree of resolution of the focus relation, and we presuppose that we do have focus at this level of resolution. And with that in place, our contrary activity becomes a contradictory activity. Okay, so let's just think for a second about why that is. And again, sorry, the version, it's the first time giving this talk. The version on the handout is not great, so listen to me instead. So suppose you are taking either asserted ASF or denied ASF as a premise in an inference, then what you're doing is taking it. Yeah, we're saying, look, I'm taking it that whatever signal there is or was that got me in a position to have my premises for my argument, it sustains a strong assertion or strong denial. So just by taking ASF as an asserted or denied premise, I'm taking it that I'm in one of the two piles, as opposed to this signal doesn't generate a verdict. And similarly, if I move to a conclusion, I move to ASF either asserted or denied, then I'm making a commitment on an activity construed as having two poles, this pile or this one. Okay, so the same move that secures stability and precision of subject matter, given what the base subject matter determining or securing relations are, these relations of focus, which are which leave many things hand-wavy. These same move, which freezes subject matter for the purposes of inference, which we're going to need to do anyway, also takes us from assertion and denial as contrary activities to assertion and denial as contradictory activities. So you said one more thing about contrast with Luca and Julian. So something that Luca and Julian are getting, I hope you, there's a lot in common here. Something that they are ending up with is that when we ask for the source of coordination principles among these various attitudes that we've got, and why is it that, why are assertion and denial, why are they in conflict in the first place? How can you account for that without presupposing a notion of content? right? Why are assertion and denial in conflict? All of that stuff. If your view is that facts about content are determined globally by the hexagon of use relations that Luca and Julian have got, you're left with relations of compatibility and incompatibility between attitudes as brute. Yeah. Whereas what I have is something like this. Consider how base subject determination, subject to thought determination happens. The facts about base reference determination, base facts about how names and predicates make contact with subject matter. The structure there, which is contrary structure, so strong assertion, strong denial are incompatible as contraries in virtue of what the base mind to world subject matter determining relation involves. Yeah. Now, if you give me that, it'll plug into your framework and get you everything you want. So you should come with me.